philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
Hey there, welcome back to the Think Grow podcast. I'm Ruben Chavez, your host, and I'm glad you're here. Okay, so I wanted to kind of riff on a topic that I don't have fully sorted out yet, but I want to talk about it out loud so that I can kind of map my thoughts and then get to writing a little bit more clearly about it. So I guess I'll start off by saying that I'm still struggling to map out my book and to write my book and to clarify my message. And I feel like I am getting closer, but I go through periods where I feel like I figured everything out, and then they'll have days where I don't know if I know anything. So that's really fun. But one of the things I'm trying to do with my book is I'm trying to create a framework that unifies many different schools of thought across psychology, philosophy, personal development, and even religious thought. Like, I want to create a framework that unifies these strands of thought, and then also kind of create a theory and practice of well-being that helps people flourish on an individual level and also a collective level. I know that sounds like a big task, and I think it is. I don't think I've ever said that out loud, so it does sound a little bit ridiculous. But I do think that it's possible, and I mean, I'm not unique in this. There have been many attempts at this, the kind of grand theory of everything, and I'm not going that far. Like, I'm not trying to be like a Ken Wilber or something who tries to unify everything together in a really official way. I just want to create a really robust framework that the average person can apply to his or her life to increase well-being. And we can talk about what well-being means in a bit, because it's more comprehensive than just happiness. In fact, that's one of my core principles that I'm working with, is that there's more to life than just happiness. There's more to well-being than just happiness. Anyway, what I've realized in trying to articulate this framework is that it does come down to values, in a sense. And what I mean by that is we only act in relation to what we value. So our actions are informed by our values. And our actions and the way we behave in relation to our values is basically morality. That's what we call ethics in philosophy, and more colloquially, morality. So that's an interesting thing to note, is that when we're acting, we're always acting in relation to a value. We're always serving a value of some sort. Like, a value could be negative, it could be positive, it could be working toward our survival and flourishing, or it could be working toward our destruction. But just identifying that is a useful thing, because we can then have more clarity about what it is that we're doing and what our actions are in service of. So something I've been thinking a lot about lately is dysfunction on both the individual level and the collective level. And what I mean by dysfunction is really any outcome or behavior that causes destruction and is antithetical to moving forward. So on an individual level, it could manifest as depression or anxiety, to the point where you are unable to move forward in life. Maybe negative emotion to the point where you are destroying your relationships, self-sabotage, malice, resentment that builds up over time and causes you to just be an angry person. So there's many ways that you can be dysfunctional as an individual. These are all maladaptive traits. They're not serving your survival and reproduction in a positive way. And then, of course, on the collective level, you have dysfunction of society, and we've seen no shortage of this in recent events, in recent times. We've had the Capitol riots, the insurrection. We've had the the craziness with the election and the threat to our democracy, and people on both sides of the political spectrum are concerned for the state of our country. I'm in America, obviously. And then more broadly, we've not even been able to come together and band together to defeat a common enemy, which is COVID. And there are many other events that I could list, but basically these are some of the things that have been on my mind that I've been trying to grapple with and understand on a collective level, but also on an individual level. And I think one of the things I've realized is that a lot of our dysfunction and a lot of the ways in which we work against our own good, our own long-term good, both individually and collectively, is when we fail to recognize the full spectrum of values that we have as human beings, or we go too far in one direction, pursuing one value to the exclusion of other values. And I'll try to make this more concrete for you here in this episode, but that's kind of the basis of what I'm trying to articulate here. Values are really important because they really are the principles on which we base our actions. So like anytime we are behaving, anytime we're making a decision, any action we take is based on some value. And that value may be conscious or may be unconscious, but we are acting in service of some value. Now, the tricky thing here actually is that values are, it's kind of a broad category because you can value anything, technically. So because of that, there are many different frameworks and theories in psychology and philosophy and other fields that measure dimensions of human experience or traits, human traits, and they basically talk about the same things except just in different language. So, for example, in the Character, Strengths, and Virtues textbook, which was written by Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson, the founders of positive psychology, this is kind of the backbone of the field of positive psychology. This is kind of the text that really gave it the foundation. So this text outlines kind of universal character strengths and higher order virtues under which those strengths can be categorized. So, for example, you've heard of like old school virtues that were espoused by people like Aristotle and Socrates, like wisdom and courage and temperance. And so these are the really high abstract virtues that they kind of really take seriously and rigorously and systematically prove or provide evidence for that the fact that they are actually embraced by all of humanity, essentially, in some form or another. So, for example, the higher order virtue of wisdom, let's say, that's made up of more concrete traits, which they call character strengths, that are things like creativity, curiosity, open-mindedness, and perspective, and love of learning. So these are the aspects of wisdom that, when taken together and looked at more broadly, those make up the virtue of wisdom. Another virtue would be humanity. And humanity would be comprised of love and kindness and even social intelligence. These are the character strengths or traits that make up the virtue of humanity, right? So they have 6 of these. And I think there's 24 traits in all, but there's 6 virtues, higher order virtues. Okay, so but let's switch over really quickly to another framework. Let's take social psychologist Jonathan Haidt's framework of the moral foundations theory, which he outlines in his book, The Righteous Mind. I highly recommend this book if you're at all interested in psychological diversity and in politics and in why people view things the way they do. But anyway, in Jonathan Haidt's framework, he really uses evolutionary arguments to provide evidence for the idea that we all kind of share the same moral foundations. We share this, and in a sense, these moral foundations are values. Just like I would argue that character, strengths, and virtues are also values. They use a little different terminology, but they are things that we value that inform our actions. But to take Jonathan Haidt's framework, just very quickly to show you how it maps on to this other kind of unrelated work by these positive psychologists, is one of his moral foundations that he's uncovered that we all share and we base our morality off of is what he calls the care/harm foundation. You know, there's a dichotomy, right? So he has, it's caring is the primary foundation, but that's juxtaposed with harm because there's always an opposing force. But this foundation, this moral foundation, as he calls it, evolved from the fact that we, in order to survive and allow our offspring to survive, early humans needed to care for their young. That's kind of our mode of being. That's not every animal's mode of being. You know, like lizards and other reptiles don't care much about their young in the sense that they don't care for them as many mammals do. So obviously we're the most social of the animals, and that's a very foundational principle for us to care for someone who's weaker than us and who needs our help and who's, quite frankly, who's very cute, right? So this is kind of an innate drive that we have. And although it had its origins in our deep evolutionary past, things in the modern world can also trigger that foundation, that morality in us, right? So if we see a helpless animal getting abused, we're going to feel empathy for that animal and compassion for that animal because it's in our nature to do so. So anyway, my point is that there's an element of kindness and humanity that goes along with the moral foundations, with that particular moral foundation in Jonathan Haidt's framework, but you can also map it right on to the character, strengths, and virtues framework that was articulated by positive psychologists Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson. And this goes on forever. Like I've done this with many different theories and frameworks, like the 5-factor personality model in psychology. Also, you know, there are other theories of well-being that kind of come from positive psychology. Also, Martin Seligman has this theory of PERMA, which are the kind of the pillars of well-being, and they all kind of match up with each other. They just use different terminology. Hey there, I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about one of our sponsors for this show, Skillshare. I love learning new skills and keeping my mind sharp. Skillshare is by far one of my favorite ways to do this. It's an online learning community with thousands of different classes for creative and curious people. You can take classes on writing, photography, cooking, productivity, social media marketing, and much more. As many of you know, I've been working on a book. A while back, I took a couple writing classes on Skillshare, one by essayist Roxane Gay and another by Simon Van Buey, who's an author. And I was just blown away by the depth and clarity and practicality of these classes. Both really helped me to hone my skills and improve my craft. Skillshare is all video-based and it's all self-paced, which I love. And most classes are under an hour with short lessons to fit any schedule. I'm talking like 10 minutes per lesson in most cases, which is a very digestible way to break up any new subject. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. So explore your creativity at Skillshare.com/TGP, and the first 1,000 people to use our link will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Receive free access to thousands of classes for a limited time. Be one of the first 1,000 people to sign up at Skillshare.com/TGP. What I want to kind of show you and communicate to you is that to base your life or your value system or your behavior on only one value is too narrow, and it's actually unbalancing. One very common way that we do this in our modern culture is by only seeking happiness, right? So when we're doing things in service of positive feelings and positive emotion and not wanting to feel discomfort or unpleasantness in any form, we're basically basing our morality, our way of acting in the world, on one value. And it's an important value. Like, don't get me wrong, the lessening of suffering of sentient beings is important, right? It's something that I think virtually all of us value. But I would say that there are other values that we should be pursuing in order to be a balanced whole person. Again, you can think of these values in many different ways. Carl Jung kind of thought about these values as archetypes, I think. And there's a form of therapy called internal family systems. And the idea with internal family systems is that you have different aspects of your personality, like different versions of you, different sub-personalities in a sense, that need to be honored and need to be given their due, and they need to have their voice be heard. And so you speak to the inner child in you, or the anxious part of you, and you ask that sub-personality what it needs, what it wants. You speak to the more aggressive part of you, let's say, maybe the part of you that wants to dominate others, and you negotiate with it. You ask it what it wants and you honor those needs. But the point is that that's kind of the idea here, is that you can think of values as sub-personalities also. Like, if it's true that we all have the value of courage deeply embedded in our psyches in some way, because courage was an evolutionary advantage to us throughout our entire history, well, that means that we need to honor that, and that we need to embody that at least on a semi-regular basis, so that we're not repressing or ignoring something that is innate within us. You can think of these values also as psychological needs. You can think of them as things that we need to be psychologically and even spiritually healthy. And so the idea would be to integrate these values in a way that's more balanced. The values that I'm talking about, I still need to work out on kind of a comprehensive list, but I'll give you kind of a working list here, because the work has been done for me in many ways already. Like, there are very, very solid and well-accepted frameworks for example, the character strengths and virtues theory is one that has outlined 6 higher order virtues, which again I would call values. And those are wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. I'll give you another list here. In Jonathan Haidt's framework, since I already referred to the moral foundations theory earlier in this episode, I'll kind of give you the list of the moral foundations there that he's outlined. And those are care and harm. The second foundation would be fairness/cheating. The third foundation would be liberty/oppression. The fourth foundation would be loyalty/betrayal. The fifth would be authority/subversion. And the sixth and final one would be sanctity/degradation. I know this may sound a bit abstract, and I'm kind of getting off track here, but I don't have time to go into all of these individually. That's not the point of this episode. I just wanted to kind of put the idea out there that if we are basing our ethical code or our value system, which is essentially the way we act, only on a very narrow conception of who we are as humans and what we need psychologically, we are not going to be as balanced and as integrated and as whole as we could be, both individually and collectively. I use the happiness example. Like if we're constantly chasing happiness in the form of positive emotion, Aristotle used happiness, like the ancients used happiness in a way that we don't use it today. They use it as a more comprehensive term that included all the components of well-being and a good life, not just positive emotion. But if you're chasing happiness in the modern sense of the word, which is just positive emotion to the exclusion of anything else, then you're going to miss out on many other dimensions of the human experience that are very important and that you need to be psychologically healthy and whole. For example, it's not always pleasant, doesn't always feel good, let's say, to engage in a challenging activity that kind of wears you down, but also is exciting for you. There's not always positive emotion associated with that, but engagement in something worthwhile and that challenges you and that kind of pushes you to the brink of your ability, that's actually a psychological need that we have. And that's something that gives us a sense of engagement, and that's a pillar of well-being. Another example that's very common is having children. Having children is also it's not an experience that gives you positive emotions over the long term on a daily basis. Obviously, there are a lot of moments of joy as a parent and of pride, but there's a lot of struggle associated with that. There's a lot of discomfort. And so this is an area where you just have to look at our behavior as a species and go, well, wait, so many of us have kids. Why do we do that? It's not for positive emotion. There must be some other value underlying that. And there are many other values that underlie that. There are values related to loyalty and building community and tribes and relationships. And of course, those overlap. Many of these values overlap with the value of happiness, let's say, or positive emotion, or just pure love, or kindness, or humanity. But even though they overlap, they are separate values because they are pursued for their own sake. You don't have children to experience positive emotion. You have children to uphold those values that I just mentioned and others for their own sake. There are other examples of this that I could give. I mean, another quick one would be learning something new, learning a new skill or a life lesson. Those are really hard things to do. If you learn something really useful that kind of destroys some of your preconceived notions, you have to update your knowledge structure, and that's actually a really uncomfortable process. So again, this is something that can't be explained by the pure happiness theory. So I will leave you with the message that I think we should be open to more values than just happiness, more emotions than just positive emotion. And there's a whole spectrum, a whole range of human experience that includes an array of character traits, an array of values, an array of moral principles that we need to include and get on the same page about collectively to kind of cooperate successfully. But also individually, we need to understand what those are so that we can pursue them in a balanced way and thereby become more integrated and whole individuals. In the next episode, what I want to do is I want to outline in a more concrete fashion what these values are and how we might go about pursuing them and becoming more balanced. This was kind of the intro, and I wanted to give you a taste for the overarching theory that I'm putting together, but that's kind of the idea. So hope this was helpful. Feel free to hit me up on Instagram at ThinkGrowProsper with any questions. You can also email me at ruben@thinkgrowprosper.org with any questions that you have about this, because I know I kind of rambled on for a long time, but I'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts on this. So bring them on. Until then, have a great day. Hey, thanks for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes on my website at thinkgrowprosper.com/podcast. That's where I put all the links and resources mentioned in each episode. It's also where I put the outlines of topics covered, which is a really good way to refer back to episodes in the future. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to leave a review on iTunes with your biggest takeaway. I make it a point to read all the reviews. You can also screenshot this episode and share it to your social media along with something you learned or found interesting. And tag me in your post because I'd love to see what you found interesting. Say hi and thank you for your support.